On the 28th of February 2026, the skies above Tehran erupted in fire as the United States and Israel launched the most devastating joint military operation the Middle East had seen since the invasion of Iraq. Operation Epic Fury, the Pentagon's codename, unleashed F-22 Raptors, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and for the first time in combat, autonomous Lucas attack drones against the very heart of the Islamic Republic. Within hours, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the man who had ruled Iran with an iron fist for 36 years, was dead, killed in a precision Israeli missile strike on his official residence while CIA intelligence tracked his every movement. The largest American military buildup in the Middle East since 2003 had been hiding in plain sight for weeks. Two carrier strike groups, the Abraham Lincoln and the Gerald R. Ford, flanked by destroyers, submarines, and an aerial armada unlike anything the region had ever witnessed. And as Iran burned, as its military command structure crumbled, as its people poured into the streets to celebrate the death of the dictator who had massacred thousands of them just weeks earlier, Iran's so-called allies, Russia and China, did absolutely nothing. Not a single Russian fighter jet scrambled in Iran's defense. Not a single Chinese warship moved to intercept the American fleet, and not a single bullet was fired by Moscow or Beijing to save the regime they had spent decades propping up. To understand this betrayal, you have to understand what came before it. A cascade of events that began in late December 2025, when the Iranian rial collapsed and millions of ordinary Iranians finally reached their breaking point. Protests erupted in over 100 cities across Iran, the largest uprising since the 1979 revolution. Shopkeepers in Tehran's Grand Bazaar shut their doors, students burned the Islamic Republic's flag, and crowds chanted "Death to Khamenei" in the streets of Isfahan, Shiraz, and Kermanshah. Khamenei's response was not negotiation, not reform, not even restrained suppression. It was mass slaughter, with IRGC snipers positioned on rooftops firing into crowds while Basij paramilitaries hunted protesters door to door through blood-soaked neighborhoods. On the 8th and 9th of January 2026, the regime carried out the deadliest massacres of civilians in modern Iranian history. Estimates from human rights organizations placed the death toll at over 7,000, though some reports suggested figures as high as 30,000. President Trump's response was swift and unmistakable. He told Iranians to keep protesting and take over their institutions, warned the killers that they would pay a very big price, and announced that a massive American armada was heading to the Middle East with great power and purpose. But here is where the story of Russia and China's betrayal truly begins, because in the weeks before the American strikes, both Moscow and Beijing were given every opportunity to stand beside their supposed ally, and both chose to walk away. China quietly pulled out of the annual Maritime Security Belt naval exercises with Iran and Russia, exercises that had been held every year since 2019, skipping the trilateral drills entirely and pretending it had never committed to participating in the first place. In January, Iran was even asked to withdraw from the BRICS Will for Peace joint naval exercises in South Africa, drills led by China, after Trump threatened a 25% tariff on any nation doing business with Tehran, and Beijing folded like a house of cards. China had purchased more than 80% of Iran's crude oil exports in 2025, accounting for roughly 1.38 million barrels per day, making Beijing the single financial lifeline, keeping the Islamic Republic's collapsing economy on life support. But when the moment of truth arrived, Beijing calculated that its $400 billion annual export relationship with the United States, its upcoming diplomatic engagement with Trump, and its ambitions over Taiwan were all worth infinitely more than the survival of the Iranian regime. Russia's betrayal was, if anything, even more cynical. Moscow had been selling advanced Verba anti-aircraft missiles to Iran, inking a deal worth nearly €500 million just months earlier, profiting from Tehran's desperation while knowing full well it would never fight to defend it. But 3 years of grinding war in Ukraine had hollowed out Russia's military, shattered its capacity to project power beyond its own borders, and left Putin presiding over an overstretched army that could barely hold the Donbass, let alone challenge two American carrier strike groups in the Persian Gulf. Russia had already lost Syria when Bashar al-Assad fell in December 2024, had watched the United States topple Venezuela's Maduro in January 2026, and now watched helplessly as another pillar of its so-called multipolar world order was being demolished in real time. As Chatham House analysts noted, Moscow could not militarily balance the American-Israeli coalition in the Middle East, lacked the economic weight to underwrite Tehran if Iran was isolated after the conflict, and faced the humiliating reality that Beijing, not Moscow, would likely emerge as the more consequential outside actor in any post-war Iran. A Chinese state media-linked social media account captured the cold truth perfectly, writing on the day of the strikes that Iran has no real ally, and that even its closest partners will always prioritize their own national interests over lifting Tehran out of crisis. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi called his Russian counterpart Lavrov on the day of the attack, not to coordinate a military response or plan retaliation, but to issue a joint statement of diplomatic condemnation so hollow and formulaic that it read like a press release drafted by an intern. They condemned, they urged restraint, they called for dialogue, they demanded an emergency United Nations Security Council meeting, and then they did precisely nothing because words without action are just noise designed to fill the silence of cowardice. The hard truth that the Iranian regime never wanted to accept is that strategic partnerships with Russia and China were never military alliances. They were transactional arrangements of convenience built on cheap oil and arms sales, not on any genuine commitment to mutual defense. China needed Iran's discounted crude to fuel its factories and its economic growth. Russia needed Iran's drones and missiles for its war in Ukraine, but neither was willing to risk a direct military confrontation with the United States over a regime that most of its own people wanted dead. And perhaps the most damning signal came before the first missile was even launched, when China evacuated its citizens from Iran on February 17th, 11 days before the strikes, telling its nationals to leave the country as soon as possible while publicly pretending diplomacy could still work. The American military machine that descended on Iran was not just overwhelming in its firepower. It was a statement of strategic clarity that neither Russia nor China could ignore, a reminder that for all their talk of a new multipolar world, there is still only one nation capable of projecting this kind of power anywhere on Earth. Two carrier strike groups, F-22 Raptors, F-35 Lightning fighters, B-2 stealth bombers, EA-18 Growler electronic warfare jets, HIMARS rocket systems, Tomahawk missiles fired from destroyers and submarines, all operating simultaneously across a battle space the size of Western Europe. Iran fired thousands of projectiles in retaliation under what it called Operation True Promise 4, striking at American bases and civilian infrastructure across the Gulf. But the Islamic Republic was fighting alone, abandoned by every nation it had counted as a friend, left to face the full might of the American military without a single ally willing to share the burden. As Iranians celebrated Khamenei's death in cities across the country, tearing down monuments to the Islamic Republic's founder, waving the pre-revolution lion and sun flag, and chanting for a free Iran, the 47-year experiment of theocratic tyranny was cracking apart at the seams. Russia and China did not betray Iran because they are weak in spirit or lacking in ambition. They betrayed Iran because the calculus of power is ruthless, and the United States of America remains the single most dominant military and economic force the world has ever known. The lesson of February 2026 is not simply that America can still project devastating force across the globe. It is that no authoritarian alliance built on shared grievances against the West can survive the moment when American power actually arrives at the doorstep. For decades, strongmen in Tehran, Moscow, and Beijing told themselves and each other that the American century was over, that the West was in decline, that a new world order was rising. And then one February morning, the full weight of American military supremacy shattered that fantasy forever.